Coming up on this week's episode.
This is the episode where I get us cancelled.
This is not a horror film. I struggle with the idea of it being classified as a horror film.
They're essentially thieves. Let's call them for what they are.
When they said life, everyone was made equal, it's not the truth. What do you get when you mix blues music, vampires, and 20th century racism? Well, you get Ryan Coogler's 2025 smash hit Sinners, and it is also the topic of this week's podcast. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Two Please. I'm your host, Abhin.
And I'm your co-host, Rohit. And today, yes, like Abhin said, we're going to talk about Sinners. We're going to touch on a whole bunch of topics. Cultural appropriation, of course, which is, to jump the gun, the overarching theme of the movie. But we're going to try and get a little more specific. More to the point, I've sort of told Abhin, this is the episode where I get us cancelled. I have a lot of vitriolic things to say about a certain group of people, but
Okay.
I'll keep it to that for now. But with that, let's start the show.
Okay, so it's your first time here. I kind of want to give you a breakdown of how things work in these episodes. What we usually do is we both give our first impressions of the film or the show that we're discussing. We then do a bit of trivia digging to see some of the BTS, the fun things that happen behind the scenes. And then we jump into some of the most memorable moments in the film, and then finally end on a bunch of themes that we go back and forth on. That, in a sense, is what the Two Please podcast is about. So I guess, given that we've set the structure out and we're ready to go, let's begin with first impressions of the movie. Rohit, you want to kick us off, bro?
Unfortunately, unlike Abhin, I didn't get a chance to watch it in theaters. Basically, I was lazy. I missed the window in which it was in theaters. But I watched it at home. It was amazing. The music is outstanding. I think already you can sort of pencil in the best Oscar winner. And I know for which song he's going to get it as well. In fact, more so than even blues music, I am really into Irish music. I don't know why. It's got that bounce to it, right? So we will discuss that obviously in memorable moments when that part comes up. I will have something to add to that, but let's keep it to that for now. Loved the acting. I am a big fan of Michael B. Jordan. Haley Steinfeld was a revelation for me. I think the last film of hers that I've seen was True Grit, to be honest. I haven't seen any of her other work. It was like, whoa, I've seen this person to now becoming this person. That was interesting. Yeah, I mean, the story is, I wouldn't say it's unpredictable, I wouldn't say it's predictable. The story that you see play out on screen is not the strongest point of the film, right? It's what it implies and what's happening sort of subliminally is what really matters. But I remember the feeling I had once the movie ended. I was like, fuck, yeah, this was like, I would love to rewatch it again. Maybe not all of it, because it's sort of like two different movies, right? The first half and second half are very different in terms of story and even in terms of themes, right? But yeah, I really loved it. I really loved it. And a bigger part of me is really happy and almost sort of relieved that Ryan Coogler has uh, reminded people that he's not just somebody who makes Marvel movies, right? He's standalone. He's sort of harkened back to his Fruitvale Station days in a sense, right? Where it's independent cinema in big quotes. This is a studio film. Let's not kid ourselves. But it's not a franchise. It's not a franchise film. It's an original script, and it goes back to the sort of themes that Ryan Coogler is an exponent of, right? And brilliant storytelling. But it's a superb package. That's how I would put it.
I mean, for the most part, I agree with you. I'm going to split my first impressions into the good and the bad, and I'll start with the bad. As a traditional horror film, this is not a horror film. I struggle with the idea of it being classified as a horror film. I akin it more to a thriller with supernatural elements. That is a more apt description of what kind of genre this film is. I know it's a blend, but it didn't. From a horror perspective, it's meant to scare and startle you, and I don't think it ever did. But it's the implied, as you said, on the surface, it doesn't work as a horror film, but the implied racism and the implied connotations it has below the surface is what was truly frightening for me, and I think for a lot of people who are watching it. Much like you, I'm a bit of a vampire purist. I don't like playing fast and loose with the lore. I was not a fan of vampires dying in the sun, given that Nosferatu has just released about 6 months prior to this. So that was the only two issues I had with the film, and the rest of it, I was in it completely. As soon as the movie kicks off and you have Sammy walking back into the church house with the broken guitar, and he's all
Yeah.
bloodied and bruised. I was like, whatever this is, I am in. I am in for the ride. And then you get introduced to the two brothers, Smoke and Stack, as they come back into the Mississippi Delta. And then for about a good hour of this film, I forgot that this was any sort of horror vampire film because I completely was immersed in this world that Ryan Coogler had built. These two
Yeah.
brothers returning to a town that they grew up in, meeting people from their past, some of them their wives, some of them their ex-girlfriends, just trying to rebuild their lives after being with the Chicago Mafia. I think it's implied that they were working for Al Capone, given the timeline, right?
I don't think it's so much implied. The name, the word mob is mentioned somewhere. I mean, if you're saying
Some, yeah, yeah,
Chicago and mob, it is
yeah.
Al
The
Capone.
the assumption is they were working for Al Capone at this point.
Yeah, yeah,
So I like that little tidbit there because in my head, as the film was progressing, I said timeline, Chicago mob, Untouchables, Elliot Ness, all of that stuff, and then we arrived at Al Capone. So I like the idea that they're on the run and they're trying to go legit. And even though they know it's going to be a failing venture just because of how the system was built back in the day, it's something that they want to give back to the community that they were brought up in, for the most part, anyway. And then the film flips on its head with the introduction of Remick, and then it descends into this mythical tale, which I fully got on board. I think the turning point, there are two moments in the film that really make it for me, rather three. Two of them are musical numbers. And
yeah.
don't really say that about thrillers or horrors. I know people who walked into this didn't realize there were musical numbers in it and were completely pissed off by it. But I fully embraced it. The two songs in particular, when we'll get to it in the memorable moments, and the introduction of Remick's character is where I was completely on board. The mid-credit scene is also one of the most effective mid-credit scenes you've seen in a movie in a very long time.
Yeah.
I think performances wise, everyone across the board is delivering stellar performances. Michael B. Jordan is proving to be one of the bigger action stars of our time. Like he's straddling the Tom Cruise Will Smith route. Like he has the potential to be the next global superstar because he's effortlessly charming. He's a really good looking man. He's helmed two franchises. One would argue that he was probably one of the better parts of Black Panther. He revitalized Rocky by himself. Fruitvale Station was a breakout performance for him back in the day. He's excellent here as well. It's so much so that now, if I know Michael B. Jordan is in a movie, I will go watch the movie. Like I watched
Yeah.
Fantastic Four in theaters, the one that starred him. So it's
I mean,
clearly
everybody
there's a
misses
lot.
sometimes, but for the most
Yeah,
part, yeah.
it wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think I came away from the film. I remember walking away from this movie a little confused because I was like, okay, as a traditional horror film, it didn't work, but I'm having this so much of the world that I found myself immersed in that I had to snap myself out of it the moment I got back out. And I think kudos to the director for making that happen. I think Coogler did a phenomenal job of taking us, two Indian boys who have no sort of connection to anyone in the rural South in America, and making us feel things that otherwise we would have never felt.
But we've been saying so much about how we felt about the film. Abhin, do you want to give our listeners and viewers a quick rundown of the story?
Sure, like I said in the start, it's about two brothers who return home after being involved with the Chicago mob for some time and set up what is known as a juke joint, essentially a place of leisure for black folks to come and spend their time, have a drink, dance a little bit after a hard day's work. During the course of the evening, they're visited by a group of vampires who insist that they come in because they're interested in one of the musicians, played by Miles Canton, whose name is Sammy, who's in the joint and whose musical prowess they want to use to contact their ancestors or their spirits. They believe he possesses some sort of power because he's able to conjure up spirits from the past and the future, which we'll get into in a bit. And thus begins this battle between the humans inside the juke joint and the vampires outside as they struggle to get to the morning. That is the premise of Sinners. It's extremely straightforward. You could even say, I think, for movie purists or for people who grew up watching 90s cinema, you could say this is almost like Dusk Till Dawn kind of retelling in the South. Another comparison you could make is The Thing or The Faculty. I think Ryan Coogler lists both The Faculty, which is a great 90s high school alien body invasion film, which if you have not seen, please, I beg you,
Yeah.
watch it. And the other being Dust Till Dawn, Robert Rodriguez's Dust Till Dawn, starring Josh Clooney and, of course, Quentin Tarantino and Salma Hayek, who you've seen like reels of. ever since Instagram became a thing. Now let's get into the BTS. Do you have any sort of interesting trivia around this?
So in terms of trivia, I really like the sources that Ryan Coogler drew from. Right, I mean, it shows that he has this penchant for getting really into the research. Essentially, he found this documentary that somebody had made about Chinese American store owners in southern Mississippi. Something that, on the face of it, looks very surprising, right? Why would there be Chinese Americans in the deep south? And I read up a little about the documentary, and it talks about how the a fair few Chinese Americans that originally came into the US from the West Coast, right? A lot of Chinese immigrants had come in to build the railroads in California, and then that diaspora sort of dispersed across states, as they had their whole moving east of sorts, right? We know
Yeah.
of the movement west, but they moved east, got into what is in the US called the deep south, and enterprisingly so they figured out the social dynamics of that society, the very clear black and white divide, and how they sort of, I wouldn't say took advantage of it, but sort of aligned themselves with it to find a little niche for themselves, right? And the fact that he found the director of the documentary and collaborated with her to sort of get that uh, authenticity to the Chinese American characters in Sinners. I think that was a very interesting piece of trivia that you shared with me. The other bit of trivia that I had was, as you mentioned, in the mid-credit scene where you get to see an older Sammy. The guy that plays him is guitarist buddy guy, who, to be honest, I didn't know about until I watched the film. Then I looked him up. Apparently, this guy is like top five reasons why rock and roll today exists in the form it does. Right? Super influential, like foundational figures of blues who I didn't know about, right? People like BB King and Little Richard have cited him as influences. And they themselves have gone on to influence pretty much all of the white people who stole the black music and made it rock and roll, right? I'm just prefacing the themes that I'm going to get to. So that was again a very interesting inclusion from Ryan Coogler in the film. Again, sort of like a tip of the hat to what the entire story is about. But yeah, this is what I had. Anything you want to add, Abhin?
So I have two bits. So Ryan Coogler compares this to old school Metallica albums. So what he did was he went back and listened to And Justice for All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and he, I think, particularly highlighted And Justice for All and One. He said, if there ever was a song that describes the pacing of Sinners, it's One. It begins slow and there's a build up, and
Mhm.
then it builds up to the almost machine gun esque like drum sequence with darkness, envision in me, all of that stuff, right? And I found out later on one of the drummers for the score in the film is Lars Ulrich.
Oh
He
wow!
plays, yeah. So Lars Ulrich plays, who is one of the founding members of Metallica and the drummer for Metallica, is part of the scoring team for Sinners. Now, it's no secret Ryan Coogler has a strong Marvel connection. There's a tribute to Chadwick Boseman in the church house where the wooden beams are cross-sectioned in a way that they're forming the Wakanda salute.
Oh,
So
I
that
didn't know that.
was,
Wow.
yeah, I found that later too. So it's a tribute to Chadwick Boseman and to his legacy. And the second is a little more interesting because this is a Marvel film that I don't think is ever coming out. So the costume designer for this film is Ruthie Carter, who has worked with Ryan Coogler on previous projects like Black Panther, and she was also the costume designer on what is the indefinitely delayed Blade, starring Mahershala Ali, which is also set around the same time. And they had basically made costumes for the film. Everything was ready, and the film just got put on hold indefinitely. So Rudy Carter went to Marvel and said, "Could I use these designs for this film that Ryan Coogler is developing?" And they said, "Go ahead, do it." So a lot of the costumes you see the background actors or the junior artists wearing are costumes that were made for Blade.
Wow. Interesting. Did not know that.
The video that Ryan Coogler shot for Kodak, where he describes different film formats, that video was responsible in getting a lot of people to go watch this film in IMAX, so much so that when it went out of IMAX, there was a clamor for it to be brought back into screens so that people could go watch it again.
No, and just to close that point out, I think Sinners is a great example for a movie doesn't just have to be great visual storytelling or be great storytelling in and of itself, right? It can visually be appealing while telling a great story. Drama does not have to be small scale. You can have drama on the a very large canvas and still make it appealing and intellectual and engaging and all of that. But yeah, I think that's what we have for BTS. Let's get into the memorable moments of the film.
I'll start with you.
So, while there is another sequence which is probably the best sequence in the film and probably the best sequence in cinema I've seen in the last 8 to 10 years easily, I will leave that to you, because the one I want to talk about, because it resonates with me a lot more, is the Rocky Road to Dublin uh, Irish jig. As I'd mentioned in First Impressions, I have listened to that song, I don't even know how many times. As an Indian, I know that song by heart and I sing it in the Irish accent because I've just heard it so many times, it naturally comes out, right? And so in this scene, Remick, who has by this point in the film slowly started amassing followers, right? As in when people step out of that juke joint, he sort of ensnares them and like bites them and turns them. And then it's almost in what seems like a show of strength and defiance and mocking the people inside the juke joint. They sort of perform this very, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, it very intimidating rendition of Rocky Road to Dublin. It's very aggressive. There's a lot of posturing, and they use the Irish jig, right? They do the Irish jig to the song, and again, for those of you who've seen videos of the Irish jig, it's a very happy dance, right? It's meant to connote celebratory times. But here you see, like the Maori haka type posturing to their Irish jig. There's a lot of undercurrent of, there's no escape for you. We're going to get you eventually. You have a bunch of people doing the Irish jig in the deep south, right? It's almost like a stamping of Irish culture in what is otherwise a vastly different cultural landscape. So again, a lot of things happening under the undercurrent, which we'll get to in terms of themes. But in terms of memorable moment for me, listening to that song in this version, right? I was like, hey, I love this song, but I don't like how it's making me feel, how this rendition is making me feel right now.
There's a moment where the crew that's inside the juke joint hears the song coming in through the window, and they open the door to see what, in essence, is vampires dancing in the moonlight. And then I heard, "Well, in the merry month," and I was like, "Oh, of course." And I remember just grinning stupidly and also being a little horrified with what I was seeing. And it's the entire troop of vampires. By this time, he's converted nearly like half the juke joint into vampires.
Yeah.
And I honestly think it wouldn't top off the sequence that had played prior to it, which in my theater didn't land completely. I'm going to be perfectly honest about it. We'll get to it in a bit. But this was the one that pulled audiences back in because I felt like that one may have been too out there for global audiences, but for but this was the one that pulled them back in because they were a little horrified, but also curious as to what was happening. And of course, Jack O'Connell, who's doing the Irish folk dance to this song. One of the many reasons he took on this role because it allowed him to do that. He's a trained dancer. Everything about that sequence is wonderful. I was looking forward to it coming out on streaming or on video on demand, so I could rewatch that sequence again because I loved it so much. As a
But
matter of fact, I got out of the theater and I texted Rohit immediately after saying, "There is one sequence in this film that you will adore." That's all I'm going to say.
yeah, and adore it, I did. But contrary to most of how your theater felt, for me, the the sequence that we've been dancing around, pun intended, uh, is the one where Miles Canton, or his character
Hmm.
Sammy, sings "I Lied to You." I It's very difficult to explain the sequence because it almost transcends. It surreal is the wrong word. Uh, I mean, technically it is surreal, but it's not played for. It's not played to confuse you. It's emotionally very deep. It is probably chronologically surreal, right? Because it doesn't follow. So essentially, what happens is the one of the themes or one of the principles they establish, so to speak, in this film is that some people have such a power that their music can transcend time, right?
And
And
space.
of course you can, and space, and of course you can take it as literally or as metaphorically as you want. This sequence sort of skirts that line where it sort of makes it feels almost literal, where when Sammy starts singing, you sort of see the people in the room, and you as the viewer, more importantly, almost physically and literally transcend space and time, right? And where there you, in that sequence, you start seeing, as he's singing those blues, you simultaneously start seeing the future and the past, right? And it's almost like an encapsulation of all of the musical heritage that the Africans and the African Americans have given to the world, right? You see the future where blues music, probably via rock and roll, led to hip hop, early hip hop, and what that has culminated in today. And you also see it us going back, right? Where, so for those of you who may or may not know, blues came to the US with West Africans, right? Primarily from Mali and to a certain extent Algeria. So the Berber tribes in West Africa have a rich musical tradition. They had an equivalent, or rather their version of the guitar, even before, like, they were brought to the US as slaves. Side note, for those of you who want to listen to or who want proof of what I'm saying, listen to this Berber band called Tinari Wen. We'll put up a link in the description somewhere. Abin will do that. But
I'm a big
you should
Taiwan
listen
fan,
to,
so
yeah. So you should listen to some of Tinari Wen's music. They are Africans. They are not Americans. Their musical tradition is African. Yes, they play the electric guitar, so they've modernized. But the notes and the motifs and all are very African. And you listen to it, you're like, hey, this is rock music. This is blues music. Because it was them who originated that sort of music. And with them, when they were transported on these slave ships, rock made its way to the USA. So you almost in this sequence go back to see those, those tribal drums and these African tribes playing music. So it's chronologically a back and forth. You sort of simultaneously see the future and the past, and you see all of the like the melding and merging of these cultures in that one moment. This is the best way I can describe it, but honestly, that sequence to me cannot be described. It can only be felt, right?
yeah, that really is.
Especially, yes,
Mm.
and especially if you're someone who, like me, has taken an interest in the history of music, not just listening to music, but try and understand where stuff came from and stuff. I try to sort of read up a little bit on that. Honestly, I felt emotional in that sequence, I'll be very honest, because I was like, everything that I've read and I've how do I put it, right, that I've sort of internalized about how music has evolved. How did this person put it in like a 2-minute sequence on screen? And that's what's happening on screen. That is matched, if not exceeded, by Ludwig Göransson's score for that sequence, right? If Ludwig Göransson doesn't win best music for the film and best song for I Lie to You, like, there is no, like, no logic, no justice, nothing. Hands down, like, there is no competition. The rest of them can not even bother to show up for the rest of the year. It is done. Like how it goes from blues to rap to African music, like traditional, like African music, and how does he manage to transition it in a way that doesn't feel off, and then brings it right back to the original progression, like chord progression of I Lied to You. I'm like, dude, just dude, it is. Whew.
I think the music is only enhanced by the visual spectacle of what's unfolding. From the moment, what I assume is he looks a lot like Stevie Wonder did in the 70s and the 80s. What I assume was like the Stevie Wonder stand in comes onto the screen is when I went, oh, this is a brave choice. Like, where are we going with this? Because then it swarms over into turntables, and then you start to see this melting pot of cultures come into the fore. And it's not just black music, because when they go
Yeah,
into Bo's little space where the Chinese shopkeeper, you can see traditional Chinese dance, and you can see Sun Wukong, who is a very strong mythical character in Chinese folklore from Journey to the West. Some would even, like, back in the cultural zeitgeist, because of Black Myth Wukong, a huge ass came to come out of China, and also the inspiration for Dragon Ball Z. Goku is essentially Sun Wukong. He has the same cloud, same powers, everything. He's a monkey. So to see him make an appearance in mainstream Hollywood cinema was just such a big surprise to me. And it took me a second to just like get my bearings right, to be like, this is brave. But then as the music swells and as you get drawn into this almost like, it's kind of like a musical orgy, so to speak. I don't want to be very crude with my words, but it is like a culmination of all these senses coming together from different genres or different decades and centuries, and it comes to such a fucking exploding crescendo at the end that I was like,
Yeah.
you know what? Props to Ludwig Göransson, props to Ryan Coogler. God bless the admissions teacher that put you in the same dorm together.
Seriously, amazing, just amazing. And of course, the ending, the not the mid credit scene, the at whatever the traditional ending of the film, the last 5 minutes. I don't know, justice pawn the right term?
I think someone must have told Ryan Coogler, like, you only do action sequences in either in legacy franchises, and he says, "Hold my beer." And as the clan come riding into town, Smoke comes out with a Tommy and just starts to unload, and it was so satisfying to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Satisfaction porn. Maybe that's the right word. I'm
That's
just like,
probably,
yeah, kill them, fucking
yeah.
racists. And I'm sure this sequence resonates a lot more with non-white people. I'll be very crude with it, but especially if you've faced some sort of racism, right? Could be an incident, could be a sustained whatever, right? If you faced it and you see this happening, I don't want to sound like a dick, right? But I'm like, fuck yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, I think that was a beautiful action sequence. There's a lot of things I. There are two interesting motifs that happen. The first is when Sammy and Stack are riding to the juke joint, and they pick up Conrad
Yeah,
off the plantation, and he's playing the song for him. And on the ride back, there's no Smoke, and he's in the car, and the song still
yeah,
continues to play. And I was like, it's a beautiful circle that closes. Similarly, there's clearly a bit of tension with Annie and Smoke because they're husband and wife who've been driven apart by the death of their daughter. And in the end, where he accepts his fate to be with them in the afterlife as he's dying, was again a really nice, sweet moment. And I
yeah,
liked that they highlighted Hoodoo culture as being the reason why they're able to repel the vampires, because Annie's the one that spots that these are indeed vampires. So she makes everybody drink pickled garlic juice to make
yeah.
them, which is again a hoodoo thing. I mean, we all have the assumption that garlic comes from, obviously, from Bram Stoker's Dracula, but this was another a twisted take on the lore, which I quite enjoyed. Anything else you want to add?
One last one
No, actually, I
is
have I have one too, but okay, go on. Go on. You finish
um,
yours.
yeah. The one more that I quickly want to mention is the whole spitting scene in Haley Steinfeld and Michael B. Jordan. Wow. Like I said,
Speaking
it was
of,
my reintroduction to Haley Steinfeld, and I was just like, I, I would totally be a race traitor.
I really want to talk about this, and it might be slightly X-rated to some, but this movie has a lot of third base,
Yeah. Let's
specifically
cunnilingus.
men
Let's
eating. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Cunnilingus.
A lot of cunnilingus, which I think we're grown adults. We're on a grown channel. We can talk about stuff like this. A lot of cunnilingus, especially in a time where stupid conservatism is on the rise, and there is some sort of messaging going around that it is not manly or not alpha enough for you to please a woman by going down on her. Again, the choice is, it's about consent. If your woman likes it, well and good. If not, don't do it. But because there's this so-called stigma of you doing this to human makes you emasculated in some way or the other, is so stupid in our personal opinion. And so it was really nice to see a film be like, hey, especially I think there's a big problem of this within the black community. So Ryan Coogler is kind of
Yeah.
making he's taking a dig at this little stigma that's running around in that community. It's the same for Indian communities. It's the same for most traditionally conservative communities, right? Where this is considered some sort of a stupid stigma.
Abhin just cut out a line that I shouted at him because apparently that can't make the cut. It's
No, it's
okay.
not making the cut. He said some absurd shit so far. But anyway, let's go on. Mm.
Yeah, but these are memorable moments. Now let's dig into the themes, right? This is what I've been really waiting to do. First and foremost, of course, the one that is probably the most obvious and in your face allegory of the film is, of course, cultural appropriation. And again, to just leave it at that is not doing it service, because while there is cultural appropriation in the film, there are variations of it. Right? It's very easy to walk away from the film and say, hey, this movie is about white people appropriating black culture, but it's not that, right? It's a little more nuanced than that, and we'll spend the next few minutes trying to sort of break that down. If we look at the syncretic white culture that exists today, right, and if I were to sort of extract the elements of that syncretic culture, for those of you who don't know, syncretism essentially is when you absorb elements of other cultures into your own, right, to sort of make this amalgamation. So if we extract the elements of that culture which have non-white origins, right? I sound very Nazi right now, but if you look at pure white culture, my opinion, it is boring as fuck. Like every aspect of it. Their food sucks. I don't know what their aversion to spice is. Music, yes, sure. There's a lot of theory that goes into, like, your classical music, your Mozarts and the Bachs, and I'm not going to say that it does not have merit. It has its own place. But as an individual, right? For the most part, I'm not talking about the cultured elite who, have grown up being exposed to this. Would you rather sit 3 hours in a concert of, orchestra or violins and shit where, it's fucking mind numbing, and I've done this, right? And I'm not saying it's not hypothetical. I've done this and I'm saying it's fucking boring, versus if you listen to Kendrick Lamar, or if you listen to even like this Irish jig, you listen to fucking Bollywood music, right? It speaks to the soul. It may not be as intellectual. I mean, in Kendrick's case, he takes both those boxes. It may not appeal to your classical sense of, hey, this is intellectual and whatnot, but it's fucking fun, dude. What I'm trying to say is, my sense is, if you remove the elements that have come from other cultures, the core culture is so boring. So I sort of get why every time these fuckers went out to conquer a new land and they encountered different cultures, they're like, hey, this is fun, let's steal it, right? And that's the theme we've seen recur throughout, right? And uh, probably the most relevant example in global culture today is their appropriation of black music. But it is not just music, right? You look at, uh, again, I'm going back to food, and again, I'm being wholly subjective here. From all the different types of cuisines I've eaten, maybe I'm growing older now, I honestly feel Indian cuisine or South Asian cuisine is the most complex, varied, and our cooking practices, for all the bullshit that French cuisine says they've done XYZ, fucking butter and tarragon and some shit. In that, you mix some nonsense and you call it food. Why did they take all this masala, and now there are more restaurants in London, Indian restaurants, than in Bombay, right? So British are the perfect example because their global footprint has been probably the widest, right? From You have like jerk chicken from Jamaica, you have chicken tikka masala from India. In Germany, you have currywurst. Currywurst essentially is sausages in Indian curry spices. All of the food that you fuckers now love comes from all of the places whose people you sort of enslaved or you sort of exploited and stuff, right? You look at music, obviously, right? Rock music, Elvis Presley and his kin. There's Bill Haley and the Comets. There's Elvis Presley. These are the early pioneering thieves, right? They're essentially thieves. Let's call them for what they are. Elvis learned under or had was spent time with BB King, spent time with African American peers who really were the pioneers, right? Took it and he's like, hey, this is mine now. But because you had Elvis was at this nexus of capitalism and racism, where there's a huge white audience with disposable income, lot more so than black people, who control your TV stations, your radio stations, who control the dispersal of the medium, are like, hey, we have a white person doing this, not as good as the black person, but because he's white, I'm going to make sure he's far more heard.
He's far more
He's far
marketable,
more
especially.
marketable.
Hmm.
His records are far more available to purchase. And now we're like, oh, Elvis owns all the, whatever. He was the big. Fuck off, dude. Fuck off.
I think the biggest erasure for music, and recently she's been coming back into the fore, is Sister Rosetta Tharpe. I think she's considered one of the pioneering guitarists of all time. Completely swept under the rug after what happened with Elvis in the 50s. BB and Elvis have been longtime friends, were longtime friends, and he never had the success Elvis did. Because of Elvis being discovered by Colonel Tom Parker, who then basically took him to all the radio stations and just marketed him as the next great white hope. He kind of overshadowed everything that was happening in blues music. He essentially took blues music from the black folks and made it mainstream white music. And there have been instances across sport that where this has also happened, right? I think the most prominent one, and usually it happens to people who don't want to be associated with any sort of movement. Like let's take basketball for example. By the late 70s, basketball was failing, and in comes Magic Johnson and Larry Bird in the same rookie class. Magic becomes the face of the NBA, and because just how racist society was at the time, they classify Larry Bird as the great white hope and then pit them against each other. And Larry is very clearly like, I grew up in bumfuck in Indiana. My mom's favorite player is Magic. I don't want anything to do with this. But again, he's too quiet and too reserved to say anything about it. But it's a narrative people have run with for time to time, because even today, to a certain degree, like every time there is a black actor or anyone of color who rises to the fore, it almost becomes like you need somebody to contest him or to challenge him or her in many scenarios, because they just can't, they don't represent a vast majority of what Americans think, which is a very silly argument to have, in my opinion.
So now we'll get into specifics, right? We're going to talk about communities, blacks and Irish, and how we want to get into a little bit of history of each. But to close this point out, so to be fair, I will also give props to white people for the things they have got right. Right, I've been shitting on them till now, but the two things that they got right, which anthropologist Jared Diamond covers beautifully in his book Guns, Germs, and Steel. The first is that the Europeans actually did rear a larger variety of livestock on mainland Europe, because of which they were exposed to a wider variety of pathogens. They built resistance to a larger variety of diseases, which was probably the hidden biological weapon they carried with them every time they went to conquer a new land, right? For example, I think 96 to 99% of Native Americans died just from exposure to new diseases when the Spanish and the Portuguese came to American shores, right? Uh, so that's what worked in their favor. The other thing I really do give them props for is the scientific method, right? Which is what they sort of discovered and perfected, which is iterative improvement, recording everything and iteratively keep improving on a process, right? That's what really, and again, this is not something that they independently came up with. To my limited knowledge, the scientific method sort of originated in the Middle East during the glory era of Baghdad, which is 10th to 12th century. But the Europeans took it and really ran with it, right? Which is why you see the in the Renaissance period a lot of, and not just Renaissance period, I would say the Renaissance onwards, the scientific method really helped them advance in technology, where a lot of Asia and a lot of Southern America and Africa, basically all of the colonies, sort of stalled in terms of development, right? So props to them, they got that right, and these were the tools with which they managed to conquer most of the world, right? This and of course deception. I mean that is the third unheard of tool. Where again, I'd urge you folks, if you're interested, to read up a little more. Classic case here would be what the Belgians did in the Congo, right? And I think I've mentioned this somewhere in an earlier episode, where they would go to local tribal leaders and tell them, hey, here's an agreement where we want to trade with you. And basically they would say, hey, so here's a woolen cloth or some material exchange. And this agreement basically says that we're doing this material exchange, and they would get the tribal leaders to sign it. Because the tribal leaders didn't know Belgian, right? What the agreement actually said was they were basically signing away vast tracts of land for a shawl or like a gift, a fruit basket or some shit like that, right? And then they would go back and say, hey, you signed this, so this is land is ours now. Another recent example that I came across, I was listening to a podcast, is in Ethiopia. As late as this was 1863, Italy wanted to make Ethiopia their colony, where they went and spoke to the king and said, hey, sign this agreement. There were two versions of the agreement. The version in Ethiopian had the phrase saying, if the Ethiopian king wants to carry out some military campaign, he may reach out to their Italian emissaries to get their opinion on whether they should go ahead with the campaign. But the Italian version said if the Ethiopian king wants to undertake a campaign, he has to take permission from their Italian overlord, effectively making Ethiopia a protectorate of Italy. So this kind of fucking deception is what came naturally to these fuckers. Again, I'm not going to say that that descends down to the current. I'm sure there are a bunch of wonderful people today, but these are the things they got right. I'm not saying they are good things, right? Morally, very questionable. Bunch of what they did, but cool. They got it right. Might has right or whatever, right? So they got it right. Kudos to them. But their core culture benefited a lot from this exposure because in and of itself it's pretty shit. That's what I want to end with.
I'm not going to add anything more. We've been going on for 20 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
but I quickly want to move on to theme number 2, and I think, which is the condition of black folks at the time, like in the rural South, and how that has, and how throughout their entire history in America they've had to fight this systematic oppression that they had no say in from the very start. And I think the only place to start, even to set the context of this film, is in the American Civil War. So the American Civil War happens because there's a disagreement between the northern states and the southern states on slavery. It splits into two factions: the Confederates and then the Union. The Union led by, of course, Abraham Lincoln and General Ulysses C. Grant. And I think the South was, what is his name? Robert what?
Robert Lee.
And the South loses the war. The slaves are freed. And I wish I could say it was happily ever after, because it wasn't the case. A lot of the Confederate generals, a lot of people associated with the Confederacy went into the American judicial system and then started to pass laws to ensure that black folks didn't have the same civic and rights and immunities as the white folk did. They weren't allowed to vote. And somewhere in the late 19th century, Jim Crow laws were introduced. Jim Crow laws were essentially a set of codes that prohibited black people from having access to the same sort of facilities and rights that the white folks had, like I just explained. It comes from an actor, I think his name is Thomas Dartmouth Rice, who's a white man that went around doing blackface in the early 19th century and became a huge act. His act was called Jim Crow. It was based off a plantation worker he'd met who was deformed, was crippled, his shoulder was off, and who would sing, had this
I
certain
wonder why.
mannerism. Exactly, right? Who had this certain mannerism about him every time he sang, and he would skip in between every stanza. And this was something this guy incorporated into his act, and it just became synonymous with black folks. And once Jim Crow laws were passed, it basically kept black folk segregated from the rest of society. I think this was passed in the 1850s. 1865 was when the war ended.
1865 is when it ended. I think the first Jim Crow laws formally came into effect late 1870s and
1870s, right? But also in 1865 in Tennessee, the Ku Klux Klan were formed by a bunch of ex-Confederate soldiers and generals
sore
in a bid to
losers.
preserve, yeah, sore losers, who were who had a strong influence for about 20 years, but was waning come the 20th century, and then in the mid 1910s, during the Prohibition era. So again, this is the Prohibition era also plays an important part in this film. It was essentially where alcohol was banned because people they felt the government felt that it was impacting the workforce and the working culture, which led
Yeah.
to a lot of these shady bars opening up to kind of house people whenever they wanted to have a drink. So come the mid 1910s, Birth of a Nation hits theaters, which portrays black people as serial rapists, and President Woodrow Wilson shows it in the White House.
It was an epic
And
piece of
then,
shit, by the way.
yeah, and then reinforces Jim Crow and revitalizes the Klan, thus bringing with him another 50 years of oppression to black people.
Again, like you said, for those of you who think things got better with time or things were better because it was the 20th century, it was not. Of course, there was Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement that happened in the 60s. Or I think finally in 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was signed by LBJ. But for those of you who haven't heard or read about the case of Emmett Till, I suggest you do. It's EMMETT Till TILL, who was a 14-year-old boy who supposedly just, I don't know if he even flirted with a girl. He just whistled at a girl,
Spoke to.
and the girl spoke to her. Yeah, and the girl went back to her. White girl went back to her parents, made up an entire story of how he harassed her. So the girl's cousins and her brothers cornered the boy, tortured him, tied him to a tree, tortured him, beat him to death, then lynched him. And the lynched body was then thrown into the river, which is where he was found after 2 or 3 days, bloated because he was in the water. And her mother, so he was at his uncle's house on vacation from, I think he was originally from Chicago. He was down in Mississippi or Tennessee. I'm forgetting where he passed away, where he was visiting relatives. So think about his mother, right, who had sent her son down to meet relatives for vacation, and then she finds out that he's been brutally killed in this fashion. And to her credit, she said, I want him to have, even with the despite the fact that he was, disfigured to the extent that he
Open.
was, she said, I want him to have an open casket funeral because I want everyone to see what they did to my boy. This was in 1955.
And history repeats itself, right? Because you have this in 1955, you have the Rodney King beatings, police brutality case against Rodney King. You had fast forward another 25 years, you had the George Floyd situation. So this never really goes away. There is every generation, there is a
Yeah.
strong reminder as to if you think things are getting better. And I think we're living in a time right now. We are recording this a week removed, or rather 2 weeks removed since Mehdi Hassan's interview with 20 white nationalists,
The one
where
guy
one
was
guy,
like, yeah, I'm a Nazi. I don't care.
yeah, one guy straight up said, "I'm a fascist." The other one, as Mehdi was making the comment about how he's an immigrant, basically lost his cool and said, "Get out. We don't want your kind here." And it's just, you think with time we would have progressed, but I feel like now there is a very scary call for 1950s or like 20th century conservatism that's been on the rise for quite some time. And I don't even know how to say. Okay, here's something that we need to add. Rohit and I are brown people. I have lived outside the country for a few years. We will never understand the oppression that black people have because we have both grown up in very privileged households.
Yeah.
But I do consume a lot of content around stuff like this. The two YouTubers that I come to mind at this point that you should 100% watch. One is FT Signifier, who does a great job of breaking down the history of black oppression, and the other being a foreign man in a foreign land who does speaks about cultural appropriation across the board, across all communities related to black people, like how Indians do it, how Americans do it, how Europeans do it. And it's they're both exceptional channels in my opinion that you should check out. Completely palatable for a global audience. So these are the two that I'm a big fan of. But coming back to the
But I mean,
point,
it doesn't have to be just black oppression, right? You look at
yeah,
what happened with us in India as well. I think we have sufficient reason to be angry with colonialism, right? You look at the Bengal
100%. Oh,
famine
we
of
are yeah.
1870s and 80s. The British were exporting food, rice out of Bengal back to the back to the UK when people were dying on the streets. 30 million Indians died during the Bengal famine. In the Belgian Congo, there were, I think, 16 to 17 million locals that were killed by King Leopold's Belgian colonizers in the Congo, right? And we talk about the brutality of the way in which Jews were treated by Nazis, which again, I am not reducing the severity of that, right? But that gets the attention. But is equivalent attention given to the fact that in the Congo, when plantation workers were not able to meet their rubber quota, the hands of their kids were chopped and given to the workers, saying, you've not met your quota, here's your punishment? Is that any worse? The point I'm trying to boil down to is so much because historically they have They've owned the channels of communication, and they have largely gotten to decide what we as a global culture should focus on. Effectively, it has boiled down to that our lives don't matter as much as theirs. It's a sad truth. Liberals might feel bad, might feel apologetic, and I appreciate that sentiment. But for us who have Abhin and I have not gone through this, but our peoples have generationally been subjected to so much trauma. I'm sorry, we need a lot more convincing from you guys.
When they said life, everyone was made equal, it's not the truth in the world today. I don't think
Yeah,
anyone. I think history has
that
proven
rule
that.
applies when it's us who are getting ahead of them, right? That's when everyone's
Yeah,
equal.
yeah. We're looking at the moment there's some sort of rise in a different in a race that's not similar to yours, then you start to get uncomfortable, and it
Yeah,
starts to like twitch, and then all the xenophobia and all the racism starts to come out. There's a term from Game of Thrones, right? The king shits and the hand wipes. As
yeah.
long as that remains the
As long
case
as we're wiping,
globally.
they're happy with us. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is. I mean, but herein comes in the nuance, right? I want to spend a quick. I know we've spoken about black injustice. The Irish do deserve a minute here.
Of course,
Herein
for
comes the
sure. I think it.
nuance. Right? Even
Hmm.
even within white people, there seems to be a hierarchy where lines are drawn on across religions. It's not even a religion; it's a sect, right? There's Protestantism and Catholicism, where the Irish, and again, this goes back far further than you would imagine, right? If I'm my history memory serves me right, the first Anglo-Saxon invasion of the island of Britain was at Lindisfarne in 19 not 19 sorry 972 or something. So I'm talking 10th century, right? Sorry, Lindisfarne was when the Vikings first invaded Ireland. Anglo-Saxons followed shortly afterwards, but for almost a millennium or so now, the Irish have been under some form of British oppression. It was the Irish also were deceived by the British. I'm again forgetting the exact year, but this was when two kings in Ireland were having a dispute. I'm sorry if I'm not familiar with the names of the Irish kings, but they effectively asked King Edward. I think this was King Edward the First at that point of time to sort of intervene, mediate. And what King Edward basically told them was, hey, if you want me to mediate, I need to have some form of authority that you can respect, right? Otherwise, why would you listen to me? And he sent them an agreement which said, hey, you will give me the power such that whatever I finally decide, you guys will respect. And the version of the agreement that he made them sign, like the British version of it, basically said, you are submitting to my rule, and whatever I decide, you guys will have to do, and therefore you become protected. That was England's in, or main British people's in into Ireland, and that's when Irish subjugation began, right? And that has, so what I mentioned about the Bengal famine is the again much more famous version of that. Again, because at the end of the day they're white. The much more famous version of
To
that
be fair,
is
they weren't always white, right? Like that was what happened
the
initially.
Irish.
They were not always white.
The Celts have always
They
been Caucasian.
they've been Caucasian, but they've never been described as white. Like if you remember
Oh, you
that
mean in
famous
that sense? Yes, yes, yes.
hmm,
Now
the
I'm saying
famous
now
poster.
because
Hmm,
yes, yes, of course.
yeah.
But again, in what they call the Great Hunger, right? The Irish potato
Hmm,
famine. Uh,
hmm.
the British brutally continued to get food out of Ireland even when crops failed because of the rot, and people were dying. I think 1 million people died, and 2 million people fled from Ireland to the US, which is why you have the huge Irish diaspora in America. 1 million
And
people died. 30 million people died here.
who came to their aid? And there's a nod to it in Sinners.
It's the Native Americans. They sent
Choctaw.
cows to the in
Yeah,
Choctaw.
they themselves were going through a bit of a dry spell themselves, which is why when the Choctaw are chasing Remick at the start of the sequence, where he's running into that house where the clan members are, it was almost considered like a betrayal to the Native Americans. The natives and the Irish, every time there's somebody that they have had a long-standing friendship throughout the course of history. Ireland recognizes them as the actual residents of North America. They're the only ones who care. And I'm a little unclear on the details of the history. This is something I came across recently, but it was the natives who came to their aid during that time. 1 million deaths compared to 30 million, but that's a conversation we've addressed
Yeah,
already.
no, I mean, but whatever, right? That's not the fault of the Irish that they
Yeah,
only 1 million people died. And you see the fact that they've gone through this trauma. Today, even with the Palestine issue, I think one of the first Western countries to call the what's happening in Palestine a genocide was Ireland. Those guys are fucking rock solid when it comes to their morals because they've
yeah,
been through this shit, right? I have rarely ever seen modern Ireland except for the abortion bit where they still had for a long time they had the Catholic hangover. Except for that bit, for on most social issues, I've always almost unanimously seen Ireland be on the right side of history. Right? That's because they've seen how this shit plays out. And to sort of close the point on the Irish bit, um, the persecution they faced in Ireland continued in the US as well because UK persecuted or Britain persecuted Ireland again because of Protestant Catholic divides. I won't even get into how that led down to the troubles in Northern Ireland down to 1970. That's a whole other clusterfuck that we won't touch right now. But even when they moved to America after such difficult times, America has largely historically been or foundationally been a Protestant country. So they faced a lot of discrimination here as well. Finding opportunities was hard. And this sort of brings me to the third theme. I don't know if it's a theme in and of itself, but a point that I want to touch on is that I know there is a school of thought that says, hey, you don't need to put yourself through misery and pain to create good art. But historically, that correlation is so strong, it's hard to dismiss, right? Most good art,
comes through
music
pain.
comes through pain. Black people, Irish people, um, even down here, right? You look at Southeast Asian music, our music, the stuff that lifts you up has primarily come through societies that have been downtrodden. And there is something to say about how when you are in those situations and you are depressed and you're like in a bad state, you are looking for some sort of escape. And that's when these effervescent art forms come up, right? And which is why classical music, like Western classical music, is shit. I'm going to keep going back to that, but anyway, this is my 2 cents on that whole line of thought.
Okay, I don't
When is like
entirely
not
agree with.
agree.
No, I don't entirely agree. I mean, Western classical music can feel monotonous. Of course, there are certain pieces in there that I will go back and listen to on
No,
a
I
consistent
listen to a
basis.
lot of it, right? Like I love
Yeah,
Beethoven's Ninth, I love Mozart's 40th, I love Mozart's 25th. So I am saying this after having listened to a lot of it, right? I listen to a lot of this is not to say that I'm dismissing and I don't listen to it. I'm saying I've heard it and I'm able to scholastically, as considering myself a scholar, I'm able to scholastically compare and come to an opinion. I'm not dismissing it without engaging in it. Let me put that out also.
I know we're so far removed from Sinners at this point, but to bring it further back in, by making the antagonist of this film Irish, and the only way you kind of introduce another wrinkle into
Yes, are you
into this
gonna go there?
situation. Please, by all means, go there.
So the fact that the oppressor in this film
Mm.
are historically oppressed people,
Hmm.
and the whole him being a vampire empowers him to abilities that humans don't have. Right? He has an edge over humans, Remick.
Mm.
And in that process, he forgets about the fact that he himself has gone through oppression and is
Yeah,
happily oppressing somebody who is weaker than him. He is. What does that remind you of in today's day and age?
us as a society,
No, what's happening in Palestine?
of course. Huh?
Like I said, today we're in a situation where nobody can say this because if anything happens, you are labeled an anti Semite, and because of those Holocaust associations, we are supposed to give Israel, the nation of Israel, I'm being very specific, right? Deliberately. We are supposed to give the nation of Israel a pass on anything that they do because they were the oppressed, whatever, almost a century ago now. How easily when you are given power it how easy is it to forget what you went through and do the same thing to somebody else, right? Remick, in that sense, is a classic example of how that cognitive dissonance can come into play.
It came from a place like when the nation of Israel was formed, it came from a place that they looked at the Holocaust and said, never again. Again, the formation of Israel itself is such a politically charged discussion, given what the piece of land they occupy and just generally the repeated atrocities that have been committed over the last 60 to 70 years since its formation. How much of a blind eye can you turn? I think we're recording this a week after there's a whistleblower that has come out. So a lot of Israel at this point is in the middle of a massive PR cover up for what is happening with essentially there's a famine in Gaza. There are a famine has the children, the population is malnourished. Some of the doctors, the UN doctors that are walking through are reporting seeing absolutely horrific stuff. There was a kid named Amir who I'm not even going to get into the story of what happened to him. If you can please go read it up. It is single-handedly the most heartbreaking thing I've read in years. What happened to this
Who do
child?
those pictures of the skinny kids remind you of? Fucking you bastards! Your parents and grandparents went through this 80 years ago. How can you do this to somebody else?
I don't understand how at this point the powers that be, specifically be the ones that control them, have not stepped in. I think they're losing any sort of goodwill that they've had in the past. Any sort of I think Africa and Ireland were the first two people to come out and be like, "Hey, we're this is a genocide. This is
People who have gone through it,
gone through it.
they
Right? Like
recognize it.
this is an apartheid. Like this is very much not a part of. Like I don't understand how this is justified. The killing of innocents, carpet bombing children, and hospitals and places of worship, churches, really puts into perspective how the West perceives life of people that don't look like them. I
Yeah,
think that to me was the biggest realization is that the lives of these people are forfeit.
they are.
And it
And
really,
like you rightly said, it's about the race, it's about how they look, right? And it's not even
yeah,
religion. Do you think there are not Palestinian Christians who are dying?
of
It's
course,
not even about religion.
there's a
It's about
pastor
just
who
about the
died
fact that
recently.
they look differently. Yeah. It's just, and that's why, right? Whenever you have people who say we made such social progress in the last century and all, I'm not going to deny it. But I'm saying we've not fixed things. We've swept a bunch of things under the rug and we've dressed it up nicely, right? When
We've
as a
gotten better at
society,
hiding things.
yes, as a society, when we're forced to pull back the rug, all those cockroaches start crawling out once again.
Yeah,
And Sinners, to bring it back to the movie that we are supposed to be discussing, this is what the movie. I'm hoping this is what Ryan Coogler intended for the movie to do. It's a great film, has great music, great acting, lovely story. But these are the thoughts that the movie should.
inspires.
I don't know if it wants it to, but it does inspire in you.
This is probably the second film that has dealt with this. Was not as blatantly as the other big tentpole film that came out this year that has a direct nod to the conflict.
Which is
Superman.
I haven't watched it yet.
I think in the first 5 minutes of watching Superman, when they have the fictional country of Boravia oppressing the fictional country of Jaranpur, and, and there's a guy that looks like Benjamin Netanyahu as the president of Boravia, aided by Lex Luthor, the American, I was just like, oh, Superman has stopped the war in between these two countries. And why did he stop the war? Because, and as Lewis Lane asked him, and he has a very simple question that really that's what made it the biggest from the summer. Superman says, people were going to die. And that has not gone down well with certain sectors of society.
Yeah, it's like that
Superman, who
Mary
himself
Hassan
is,
debate. When you're into
hmm,
pushed into a logical corner and you can't morally, if your position is not morally defensible, at some point you're going to
they
just be
were
like, yeah, fuck you, I'm wrong. I mean, I stand for this. What are you going to do about it?
I, I don't think it's wrong to stand for people who are being ethnically cleansed. I don't think it's wrong to stand for people who are being genocided. I don't think it's wrong because if we're being perfectly honest, all of us in life, and this is a little more philosophical than I intended this to be, all of us in life, it is just who we are born to, where we are born is a matter of fucking luck. You
Yeah.
and I are sitting in this place 100 meters apart, maybe 200 meters apart, having a conversation because we are lucky to be born where we are. There is nothing could have stopped us from being born in Gaza. Nothing could have stopped us from being born during the time of the Holocaust as Jews. We just have luck. Nothing could have stopped us from being born as Koreans or Chinese when the Japanese were pulling people into Unit 731. What we are here at this point in time of history, and we are not in conflict because we are just lucky to be where we are.
Like baseline privilege that we have. The least we can do is do something with it.
Exactly.
And
It's like
even
we
if
talk
we do
about it.
something, just don't be an asshole. That's not very hard.
Basically, be kind. Be kind is the movie is the theme of the summer.
Yeah.
I think we've more or less covered everything. Covered cultural appropriation. We've covered the history of Irish oppression and how that has played out in different circles. We've spoken about the extremely horrific conquest of Europeans, of Americans, of colonizers, and imperialism over the last 200 odd years, both close to home for us as well as in Africa, in in the US with what happened with slavery. And I think these are all themes that are bubbling under the surface of this film.
Yeah.
I think this movie pricks a little harder if you come from a line of like you come from a race where there's been a history of oppression, of strong oppression in the past. Yeah, I think I kind of want us to like now come back. It's been a heavy conversation, so let's take a bit of a step back and engage in some sort of light-hearted, a bit of a light-hearted end to this episode. Two things I wanted to ask. The first is more specific to this episode, and the second is a silly thing that we do with all our episodes, really. So the first is I think this is Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler's fifth collaboration. In the five that they've worked on together, where does this rank?
See, Sinners and Fruit Whale is really 1-2 for me. Depends on how I feel at the time, that time of day. But I would say for now, Sinners first, then Fruit Whale Station, then Black Panther, then Creed, and then Black Panther Wakanda Forever.
I think for the most part, I'm with you. Sinners is probably their best work together. I think it's the most nuanced work together. Fruit Whale had the biggest impact on me when I first watched it. Creed was my biggest surprise. I think I was like, oh, this is just another Rocky remake. Stallone is like flagging the franchise, and when I heard it was being held by the director of Fruit Whale Station, I was stupidly cheering on during the end of that film. I think Ryan Coogler just gets music right. I don't think
Yeah.
he's able to put together a film that just connects with you emotionally. And he pulled a performance out of yesteryear Stallone, which not a lot of people have been able to do. Then, I mean, Black Panther is a film I didn't quite enjoy in the past because of how Bollywood it really is. But the themes it tackles and just the what do you call and the internal struggle that the antagonist faces more than the protagonist of the story, I found to be quite interesting. Then Wakanda Forever, I felt had the most difficult job in setting the events of what happened between the first and the second film, right? And it does a serviceable enough job, but I don't think it's a movie I quite enjoy. I think that's probably my least favorite out of the five, even though Angela Bassett is delivering a insane performance in the film. So I think, yeah, that's where I'd rank them.
Coming to our last section, which for those of you who don't know, this comes from the fact that for almost every episode that we record, Abhin somehow tries to shoehorn Gone Girl into the conversation somehow. At some point, I was like, fucking let's make it a part of the episode. So this section is called 6 Degrees of Gone Girl. What we try and do is we try and connect the movie or TV show that we're discussing to Gone Girl, either through the actors or directors or some personnel between the two films, and we try and get to the shortest part between the TV show movie we're discussing and Gone Girl. I already have the answer for this, but if you want to take a crack,
You,
go for
let me take the crack because I think you already said I haven't thought this through, so I'm going to think this through.
it. And you're gonna abuse me when you realize what it is.
One eternity later.
There is one simple connection to this, like the most simple connection to this. But have we decided not to do it?
Hey, no, why? I want to do it.
Are we both thinking the same thing? Haley Steinfeld, Matt Damon departed, and then yeah. But I thought we decided not to do this in the interest of
But okay,
like
so that people know what we're talking about and we just don't end up sounding like giggling girls, by saying Haley Steinfeld, True Grit, Matt Damon, Departed, Ben Affleck, Departed. Why do we need Departed? Sorry, Matt Damon,
Good Will Hunting, Gone
Good
Girl.
Will Hunting, Ben Affleck, Gone Girl. So
Hmm.
that's one way. So again, for more context for people, we have
Matt Damon is
a lot of
banned. We're going to ban
Matt
Matt
Damon
Damon.
is banned because that's the easiest way. The Matt Damon to Goodwill Hunting to Gone Girl pipeline has been abused enough. So let's try and find a non-Matt Damon connect.
There's another Haley Steinfeld, but this is a TV and
Give
so
yours, it's
Haley's
okay.
okay. Haley Steinfeld in Hawkeye. Jeremy
Okay.
Renner is Hawkeye.
Uh-huh.
Jeremy Renner, Ben Affleck, The Town. Ben Affleck, Matt Damon,
Ooh,
and Gone Girl.
nice.
But
Nice.
again, that's TV. I'm not exactly.
That's
It's
fine.
not a.
So what?
It's not pure.
Hey, you sound like a Nazi again.
I've never. I've never been a Nazi, guys. What the hell?
Okay.
Don't say shit like
So
this.
TV shows are fine because I'm saying that because my other route also has TV show involved. So I am saying I'm legitimizing TV shows. Michael B. Jordan, Fantastic Four, Kate Mara. Kate Mara, House of Cards was in House of Cards. House of Cards was directed by David Fincher. David Fincher directed Gone.
I was trying to find Kate Mara, Rooney Mara, because Rooney Mara is Elizabeth Salander, no? So,
Yeah, also that.
so I was thinking of that. I don't know how to make that happen. So yeah, that brings us to the end of this episode. I think it's been a long one. It's been an intense one. It's not always been a fun one. It's been an uncomfortable one for some, including me. But if you liked what you heard, if you didn't like what you heard, please feel free to leave us notes in the comments. We're more than happy to respond. You'll see this pod on most places. There'll be bits of it on Instagram as well, where we can get in touch with us. That's kind of our go-to place. And if you've enjoyed this and if you like this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It takes a lot of effort to put these episodes out. It's not, if you've gotten here by now, you understand this is not just two guys sitting in front of a screen and just riffing for 3 hours. There's a fair bit of editing involved. We try and make sure it's as engaging as possible for you, the audience. So if you could help us grow the channel, it would be a really great thing. We'll be back again in about 2 weeks' time for our next episode. We haven't decided it yet, but be sure to check our Instagram page. I'll leave a link to it in the description for updates on what's coming next. Until then, take care. I'm glad you could join us for this episode. We'll see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.